March 2021, participants recognized the urgent need to streamline access to climate finance with greater individual and collective action required both before and following COP26. The task force on access to climate finance was announced in response to calls for coherent and effective support for developing countries' efforts to decarbonize their economies, adapt to climate change, and establish green growth pathways. Nations can only rise to the challenge of the climate crisis by working together. At COP26, the world must finalize the Paris Rulebook. World nations must find a solution on carbon markets by creating a robust system of carbon credits that support the move to net zero, resolve the issues of transparency by putting in place a universal system that encourages all countries to keep to their commitments, broker an agreement that drives ambition from governments over the coming years to keep 1.5 degrees alive, accelerate action to tackle the climate crisis through collaboration between governments, businesses and civil society. Bureau Report, DD India.
So that was a ready reckoner sort of a thing on COP26, what this climate summit is all about, what are the targets and what does it seek to achieve. We take forward a conversation on India at COP26. A fresh panel is joining us now. Let me quickly introduce you to them. We have with us Manjeet Puri, former senior diplomat, Professor P.K. Joshi, Environmental Studies Department at JNU, and Suruchi Badwal, Director, Earth Sciences and Climate Change, TERI. Good evening and warm welcome to all of you. Ambassador Puri, we just heard briefly Prime Minister's intervention at COP26. His intervention and the point that he made about global support for local adaptation. That's telling. If you could sort of just help us simplify and elaborate as to how does that work for India. And when I say India, I also mean a lot of developing countries who share common concerns.
Shubhendu, thank you very much. I want to say that this little excerpt that we heard of the Honorable Prime Minister has gladdened my heart a great deal. Adaptation is the other side of climate change, yet the entire world remains fixated on mitigation. And I am so glad that at his level, he raised this issue and made it crystal clear in front of the global leaders. Now, what is adaptation? Adaptation is what you have to do with climate change, which is in any case confronting you. Let's look at this very simply. The last year, as a result of COVID, saw some of the slowest growths in the economies, in fact, the largest slowdowns in global economies that the world has seen in decades. And yet, did climate change really finish or slow down? Not at all. Instead, we've had devastating fires, cyclones, all kinds of other difficult weather events taking place. And why does this happen? It happens because the warming that the earth is facing is basically there as a result of the accumulation of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And these remain in the atmosphere for very long periods of time, indeed for decades or so. So, while current emissions are important, nothing is as important as the stock of carbon dioxide, which in fact is something that has been accumulated over a century as a result of it.
Right, Ambassador Puri, I'll just hold you for a moment. Let's listen in once again, Prime Minister's intervention at COP26.
एडेप्टेशन के महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दे पर मुझे अपने विचार प्रस्तुत करने का अवसर देने के लिए माय फ्रेंड बोरिस, थैंक यू। वैश्विक क्लाइमेट डिबेट में एडेप्शन को उतना महत्व नहीं मिला है जितना मिटिगेशन को। यह उन विकासशील देशों के साथ अन्याय है जो क्लाइमेट चेंज से अधिक प्रभावित है। भारत समेत अधिकतर विकासशील देशों के किसानों के लिए क्लाइमेट बड़ी चुनौती है। क्रॉपिंग पैटर्न में बदलाव आ रहा है। बेसमय बारिश और बाढ़ या लगातार आ रहे तूफानों से फसलें तबाह हो रही हैं। पेयजल के स्रोत से लेकर अफोर्डेबल हाउसिंग तक सभी को क्लाइमेट चेंज के खिलाफ रेजिलिएंट बनाने की जरूरत है। एक्सेलेंसी, इस संदर्भ में मेरे 3 विचार हैं। पहला, एडेप्टेशन को हमें अपनी विकास नीतियों और परियोजनाओं का मुख्य अंग बनाना होगा। भारत में नल से जल, टैप वाटर फॉर ऑल, स्वच्छ भारत, क्लीन इंडिया मिशन और उज्ज्वला क्लीन कुकिंग फ्यूल फॉर ऑल जैसी परियोजनाओं से हमारे जरूरतमंद नागरिकों को एडप्टेशन बेनिफिट्स तो मिले ही हैं, उनकी क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ में भी सुधार है। दूसरा, कई ट्रेडिशनल कम्युनिटीज में प्रकृति के साथ सामंजस्य में रहने का ज्ञान है। हमारी एडप्टेशन नीतियों में इन पारंपरिक प्रैक्टिसेस को उचित महत्व मिलना चाहिए। ज्ञान का ये प्रवाह नई पीढ़ी तक भी जाए, इसके लिए स्कूल के सिलेबस में भी इसे जोड़ा जाना चाहिए। लोकल कंडीशन के अनुरूप लाइफस्टाइल्स का संरक्षण भी एडप्टेशन का एक महत्वपूर्ण स्तंभ हो सकता है। तीसरा, एडप्टेशन के तरीके चाहे लोकल हो किंतु पिछड़े देशों को इनके लिए ग्लोबल सपोर्ट मिलना चाहिए। लोकल एडप्टेशन के लिए ग्लोबल सपोर्ट की सोच के साथ ही भारत ने कोएलिशन फॉर डिजास्टर रेजिस्टेंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर CDRI की पहल की थी। मैं सभी देशों को इस इनिशिएटिव के साथ जुड़ने का अनुरोध करता हूं। धन्यवाद।
All of that was once again Prime Minister's interventions at the upcoming COP26 summit. Ambassador Puri, if you could please complete the point that you were making when I had to stop you.
Thank you, Shubhendu. Once again, the same point
Yes.
highlighted. The importance, in fact, the imperative for adaptation, because climate change is here to stay and it's not stopping even as a result of global slowdown. In fact, let me say this very simply. Action on adaptation naturally would have to be local, but its support must be global because the cause of climate change is a global issue. And it is as a result of a global situation which has been created mostly by the industrialized country. Now, I think the fact that at the level of the Prime Minister, this thing has been raised in the highest particular plenary in the COP. I hope that this particular COP in Glasgow, other than focusing on the things that you mentioned, which are essentially mitigation, raised ambition in terms of reducing the greenhouse gases which are produced. I hope that this COP will also focus on adaptation, something which has been promised, but in the past never walked. And I think we hope that the adaptation talk will be walked this particular time.
Right. Suruchi Badwal, ma'am, if I can come to you. I think it's when we start talking about the theme of adaptation is when we embrace the reality of climate change, especially in the manner in which it has played out in developing countries. Ma'am, if you could take us through in a little more detail the glimpses of those changes that Prime Minister hinted about, the manner in which our farmers are facing the challenge of climate change right now, more urgently, the manner in which developing policies are being shaped, keeping in mind the changes that have already been noticed vis-a-vis climate change. What are these impacts that the developing countries, that India, for instance, is experiencing, that makes adaptation a buzzword, a key point in all development policies and vision creation?
So, thank you very much. I would like to start by saying I'm quite thrilled today, actually, hearing the Prime Minister talk about adaptation. And it's been a long time for us to see adaptation being pitched at that level, at the high level segment of the COP. And this is music to my ears, actually. And frankly speaking, as Ambassador Puri mentioned, there are only two ways to basically respond to climate change. One is mitigation and the other is adaptation. There has been a lot of emphasis on the mitigation to climate change, frankly, because I think the focus was on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and the concentration levels of those gases so that we could contain the change in the climate itself. But now we realize we are into it and would be experiencing it. In fact, we are experiencing it, as we're speaking. So for the next many decades, we would continue to experience these changes, even if we were to decide to basically stabilize today. So ideally, we are all in it together. Of course, for a country like India, which is a large developing country with a huge agrarian society, with many people dependent on agriculture for their livelihoods, we stand to be affected the most. Many sectors which are sensitive to the changes in the climate, directly affected by the changes in the climate that we're talking about, changes in rainfall patterns, changes in temperatures, etc., which will directly affect their living and their livelihoods, would be the ones who would be largely affected. India having almost 600 million people living in rural areas, dependent on agriculture directly or indirectly for their livelihoods, would we basically foresee that the impacts are likely to be quite huge for a large number of people who are dependent on such sectors which are climate sensitive for their livelihoods, and the impacts are going to be on. So very simply put, I normally say everything under the sun is going to change and everybody is going to get affected. We're talking about how sectors are going to get affected. So it's agriculture, forests and biodiversity, the health sector getting impacted,
right,
coastal regions getting affected, and then of course, basically, the water resources, how they're likely to get affected with changes in rainfall patterns. So all sectors are likely to get affected, and each one of us, human systems and natural systems, which are connected to these systems that I'm talking about, will also basically have implications given the changes that we would be observing in those sectors. So ideally, while natural systems and human systems would get affected, at the end of the day, each one of us will also feel the pinch of it at our own levels, whether it's related to food being provided on your table at a certain cost, or it's about water being available to us, freely 24/7 in certain cases, or in terms of health, the risks to health that we basically foresee, and therefore need for better health infrastructure and support services. So a whole lot of things that are connected, and Prime Minister mentioned there are links to development, and I do think there are direct links to development. When we're talking about adaptation, of course, global support for local adaptation, but that basically means a lot needs to be done in terms of doing development in a way where basically we are addressing the concerns related to climate change and are able to reduce the risk related to climate change and adapt better.
Right. Professor Joshi, staying with this theme of climate adaptation that Prime Minister has emphasized, and he's also making a case for developing countries like India. Help us understand, as far as this, I mean, it's strange, even this phrase is not very common in climate vocabulary. Over the days we were talking about climate change initiatives, we've been using the word mitigation more than usage of the word adaptation. Help us understand, how do the developed countries and developing countries and poorer countries, their pattern of adaptation, their challenge of climate adaptation vary in the situation that we are at the moment?
Well, good evening. Thanks for having me here. As Suruchi mentioned, there are two pathways to address climate change: mitigation and adaptation.
Right.
Mitigation is more of an intervention which often needs funding and also some scientific inputs, whereas adaptation, it addresses the short-term goals as well as the long-term goals. To me, adaptation is more of a sustained kind of steps,
engagement
which,
with these,
any community can take. And I'm proud, I'm glad seeing Prime Minister talking about this, because most of the scientific evidences which were coming from the tropical world, Asian countries and the developing countries, they were repeatedly mentioning about adaptation to be looked at. And the beauty is, adaptation is not like one size fits all. And this is what Prime Minister has emphasized while referring to local adaptation, which might need global support. So to me, it is a very scientific way of looking at climate change and the steps to combat that. Plus, he very nicely quoted the example of agriculture and the agrarian community. Though all the ecosystems, entire range of life forms and different sectors, they get affected because of climate change. But agriculture is one which is very heavily and very hardly hit by the changes in temperature and changes in the precipitation regimes. There are examples from many parts of the country wherein the sowing window has changed or the harvesting window has changed, even the ripening of the fruits, flowers, and in totality, entire the acreage, the production which is there, that is getting affected. But if you look at actually on the ground, talk to common people, so they will also refer to that the soil moisture is getting lost because of the rise on temperature, and also pest, many other kind of problems are there. So herein, adaptation is the one which comes as a very natural way of fitting oneself into the changing climatic regimes, changing patterns of temperature and changing patterns of precipitation. So this is something, as I said, a sustained long-term vision for addressing any of the sectors. So this is something very nice, seeing Prime Minister putting it in the best of the meetings of COP and giving a lateral thought to rest of the world, the way everybody was talking about net zero emissions or say mitigation options.
Right. At that point, Suruchi ma'am, if I can come to you, when he talks about adaptation and he gives example of initiatives that have taken place in India, which we otherwise may end up looking at as isolated development programs, whether it is Swachh Bharat Abhiyan or the plan to get drinking water to every household, or the initiatives that have been made for the workers in the agrarian sector. How do we see these initiatives also in the larger context of climate initiatives, because often we see them as individual efforts to bring about a change in the society?
So there are many development programs which have a great potential to contribute to adaptation. I'm just giving an example of one, which is the Integrated Watershed Management and Development Program. And if you look at this particular program, it has been implemented in India since the late 1980s. So it's already been like some 30-40 years, and India has been basically implementing integrated watershed development management programs across different parts of the country. Now, this particular program of the Government of India has huge potential in terms of contributing to adaptation. And if you mark my words, I'm using the word contributing to adaptation, and it's not adaptation to climate change. And the reason why I'm using that word, quote unquote, contributing, is they are not adaptation programs per se. They need to be reviewed. They need to be assessed from the point of view of the potential to contribute to reducing the climate risks that we are talking about. They have to be contextualized to the nature of the risks that we are talking about. As you may see, that all regions don't experience the same kind of risks. For example, we by now know the large patterns that we basically observe across different parts of the country. For example, Uttarakhand, prone to floods, flash floods, Mumbai getting waterlogged and heavy precipitation even. So there are certain patterns that basically we observe. So we know those patterns, and therefore if there are certain programs and schemes that have the potential to contribute to adaptation, they need to be assessed in terms of their performance with regard to a changing climate. And if they would be able to deliver those conditions, well and good. If they were to be done, or what needs to be changed or enhanced in those programs and schemes for them to be able to contribute to adaptation. So all these programs and streams, and we cannot use them as synergistic words. Development is just not adaptation. We're talking about a development plus approach, which links the climate concerns and the risks context into the development programs, and sees whether those development programs can deliver under those conditions to be able to basically contribute to adaptation. And that's where the difference is.
Right. Ambassador Puri, I want to return to that very important statement that Prime Minister made, global support for local adaptation. We've been talking about adaptation. I want to talk about the first part of it, global support. And the moment I say it, I'm also concerned. Over the days, we've been talking about global commitments that have been made by the developed countries, for the developing countries, for the poorer countries, and whether those commitments were met with, were fulfilled over the years. How do we understand the phrase global support here, and in what manner are we hoping this will pan out?
Fundamentally speaking, we all look at the issue of global support not just because there is a historic responsibility of the developed countries, but also because they have the capacities to be able to provide the support which many in the developing world do not have the abilities for. What are some of the granular aspects? Certainly money, finance, certainly technology, but let me also add another thing, capacities. The knowledge required to be able to undertake these kind of actions, which are absolutely necessary. Now, let me talk at the main issue of finance, which in a sense, many people would say money is fungible and you can do everything with it. You can buy technology, you can buy capacities and so on. What has the developed world really done? In 2009, in the COP in Copenhagen, there was a promise of $100 billion a year. We haven't come anywhere near that money. Today, we are reiterating it. Yesterday, the G20 summit, which had the largest economies, reaffirmed that particular thing. So therefore, when the Prime Minister makes this point, he makes it quite clear that those who have the capacities, please ensure that in the interest of humankind and indeed in your own interest, do support those who don't have the ability. Secondly, we come to technology. Now, technology is certainly one of the most important pillars which will help us undertake not just adaptation but even mitigation efforts. Wherein lie the largest amount of technology innovation ability? They lie in the largest industrialized countries of the world. What are they doing in terms of undertaking basic research which can result in mitigation of climate change? What are they doing further with whatever research they've done about sharing it and sharing it in a manner that is affordable for the large parts of the world which is in the developing countries? The answer is precious little. So when we come to capacities, when we come to knowledge, there isn't very much. Therefore, once again, let me underline this point. Need for adaptation, absolutely paramount, generally forgotten. Very good that it's on the table. Support. This is something which has been on the table for a very long time. Many in the industrialized world, in fact, look at support, i.e. finances in the main, as a kind of bait to get the developing countries, the large developing countries, to be pushed to undertake fundamentally what you may say mitigation actions, even if it means a certain degree of curtailment of their development imperative. I hope that this COP will once again not just reaffirm the commitment, but actually make those who are capable, that is the best, the biggest of the developed countries, to walk the talk on support. And support certainly includes finances, technology and capacity.
Right. Professor Joshi, what are your thoughts on, as far as global support is concerned in terms of, as Ambassador Puri just mentioned, capacity, money and technology? Over the years, how has that sort of played out? I mean, we've seen newer technology making their way in the country. We're seeing more electric cars and similar technology, conversations on green hydrogen, for which a lot of advanced technologies are also shared and taken from countries that already have them. But broadly, with the urgency with which we need to sort of have access to these technologies, and developing countries need to have access to these technologies, what is your understanding of the manner in which it has panned out so far?
Well, definitely, if one is interested to bring a change, finance is needed, technology is needed, and the capacity is needed as well. But, at the same time, when we are talking about these changes, these are not the abrupt changes. These are the transitional changes which need to take place. And to have those transitional changes, capacity is something very important, how to bring that delta change and then subsequently take it forward. So I see this having a global support for the local adaptation is something necessary, and it is very nicely being narrated by the Prime Minister, and it has actually developed a newer discourse, taking a drift from mitigation to adaptation. I would also like to just add on, we also talked about two very contrasting things. One is the traditional knowledge, which was again, though the scientific community was repeatedly mentioning about that, but when it was coming to the policy level, and at least at the global policy level, often people were missing that. And the second thing, as an academic, which I found something very interesting is, wherein he talked about bringing course curricula and training or teaching the kids onto that. So that is a true sustainable development approach. You are preparing the next generation towards that. So overall, I see it a very encouraging kind of take, and the way it has been placed there at the COP.
That was an important point. Suruchi ma'am, if I can bring that point to you, making climate change conversation studies a part of formal education. So far, what we see, a lot of youth activists who have rightfully gained a lot of limelight, acting from certain fringes and trying to make their voice heard. What difference do you think would it make when climate change conversations become a part of a formal curriculum? What kind of cascading effect will that likely to bring?
So we do need to have that cascading effect and have the youth involved in, the discussions that we are having. related to climate change, because we are leaving behind a world which is, to the next generation, which is already changing and is likely to continue to change. And this is a world that is going to be owned by them, in which they will be living. Therefore, they better understand what they're in for and what kind of experiences they would be going through as they would be seeing all these changes, and at a much faster, rapid rate than what we have experienced in our lifetime. So definitely, I think we have to have the youth on board. We need to have them understand what are we talking about,
right.
And we also need, solutions from them. And in certain cases, sometimes you find the youth coming up with some interesting, innovative, creative ideas to think about. And you can also see at the global level, many of the things are being, the advocacy part of it, it's pretty visible from the younger generation in terms of being very vocal about the issues and talking about it.
So Rishi, on that point, in fact, I just want to add that a few weeks ago, there was this UN Day celebrations, and I engaged with some young innovators in the field of environment and climate change. And a point that they had to make, one of them, was that, and she was an engineer, and the entire classroom of engineers, there was just one project that was aimed at sustainable development. Everything else fit into the conventional engineering stream. So this point that you're making, that making the youngsters part of the solution in a more active and a wholesome manner is crucial.
Yeah, and all the more because they are going to basically take things forward, and it would be good that we engage them right from the beginning. So include it in the course schools, in the course curricula, and also at the college, university levels, so that people are aware of the issues, and they're already thinking about the solutions, as they are growing and basically, entering career paths. So they are very much part of the system and the solution, and they're already thinking in that direction. I think it's a very important thing to do. So raising awareness and building capacity has to be something that has to be done apart from the focus on mitigation, hardcore mitigation, adaptation that we're talking about, interventions that need to be looked at, whether in the form of policies, regulation, technology, or assistance for climate finance.
Right.
On the other hand, I think education systems and building of institutional capacities and capabilities to deliver on the ground would also be very crucial in terms of the actions and for pushing forth the implementation that we're looking for.
Right. Ambassador Puri, we noticed that this is the second time that Prime Minister has referred to lifestyle changes in the G20 intervention also, and now also he says lifestyle changes to promote adaptation is the way forward. Now, the word lifestyle also interestingly brings into the context the responsibility, and correct me if I'm wrong, not just institutions but also individuals from developed countries, from developing countries, and from poorer nations. How significant do you think this reference is being made again and again by Prime Minister?
I think the significance of changes in lifestyle and making them sustainable is something that can hardly be understated. It's absolutely imperative. Much of the industrialized world would like us to believe that the solutions to climate change lie just in decarbonization. Now, decarbonization is certainly important. No one denies that. But I think we need to understand that we are aiming at sustainability. And for sustainability, we need to look at profligate lifestyles. We need to look at unsustainable consumption and production patterns. And I am glad that India has once again taken the lead to bring this to the fore. The G20 statement mentioned the need for sustainable production and consumption. Lifestyles have been brought in. And these are all things which are particularly important and things that can be done even at the level of the individual. Needless to say, however, it's not just action at the level of the individuals, at the level of societies, economies, countries, etc. is needed. But the recognition, and herein lies another interesting point. Most developing countries, and India is a particularly good example, possibly as a result of the fact that profligation and our abilities to undertake profligation is very limited. We happen to be, by standards, fairly sustainable societies, and our lifestyles are generally sustainable and more constrained as compared to what you've seen in the developed world, where especially in the last 40, 50 years, you've seen a plethora of consumerism and profligate spending, unsustainable kinds of consumption as well as production. Indeed, I'm very much reminded that, the planet has enough for everybody's need, but it's greed which is the problem, as Mahatma Gandhi mentioned. And, we need to control this greed. And the Prime Minister bringing it to the fore, I think, is again particularly important. Somebody mentioned here the question of young people. I sincerely hope that they are listening. No answer to climate change, sustainability can be done without the participation of those who have the greatest stake, and that is the future generation. And they need to understand. Good, convenient, comfortable lifestyle, why not? All of us want it. But let us also ensure it is sustainable, it is environmentally friendly, and it's something which helps protect the planet. And indeed, let me say, not just the planet, but protects humanity, because that is really what we are trying to do and achieve for the future generation.
Right. Professor Joshi, from you, we'd like to learn a little more about this theme of lifestyle changes, because it really, the moment we talk about it, it broadens our conversation in the context of climate action, because then I think we're also talking about the culture in which we are growing up, the culture in which youngsters are growing up, the manner in which international economy works, the manner in which consumption, consumerism do not have a limitation or an end. They don't operate in a context, but profit is something sort of that drives our economies. How significant is to then reflect on lifestyle changes as a defining factor if any climate action or climate change in a positive way is to be made a reality?
Well, there is a term ecosystem, wherein, human being is one part of entire life forms. But what we see is, this ecosystem is getting converted or has actually gone through something called as ecosystem. Whereas
right.
Human being is trying to harness, trying to exploit any of the resources beyond its need. So that is what the lifestyle is, going beyond something what you need, and then doing the unsustainable way of extraction of resources. It could be fuel wood, it could be aggregating the fodder, and also the lifestyles which are there actually in the main city centers. Excessive use of energy, excessive use of wasting food items, or going beyond what actually you need for a better living. So it is just not the climate change which will be addressed by having a sustainable lifestyle, rather the entire set of global environmental issues which are over there. These all somewhere are tagged with the unsustainable use of energy, unsustainable use of commodities or the resources which are around. So sustainability has actually emerged as a mantra, and this COVID has given us a wonderful teaching. When we all were locked down and we all stayed within homes, we got to understand that there is no need of over expending on many of the things which otherwise as a normal life we were doing. So getting reoriented towards a lifestyle which is more sustainable in nature will certainly be giving many of the benefits to the challenges of climate change. But it will also be addressing many of the global environmental problems which are there, whether it is biodiversity loss, whether it is groundwater depletion, pollution of air, or other kind of extraction of natural resources which are basically becoming day by day unsustainable in nature. So precisely, it's not the tropical countries, it is the entire world which has to relook into this, reboot the way, a lifestyle is dictating many of the things in day-to-day activities. And that will certainly bring in a delta change in many of the aspects of environmental problems which are over there. And again, when it comes to teaching, bringing these kind of things in the course curricula, we have a contrasting examples of environmental sciences, disasters, which are often taught when somebody actually gets into a college level or say higher secondary level. But bringing it right from the primary education will be giving a lesson or appropriate learning to kids, and it will definitely be impacting their thought process, their style of working when it comes to the lifestyle. So that will be benefiting us in multiple facets to me.
Right. And Ambassador Puri, lifestyle changes to promote climate adaptation. Do you also see that the world is at a very crucial juncture? Yesterday at G20, we were talking about economic recovery, the world opening up again, trade, tourism and other engagements opening up again. And this may be a great time to do it in a new way and Shantanu, I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but at least from the vision perspective, it could be a crucial time, a special time to sort of change our ways.
Shubhendu, you're very right. Whenever we have disasters, we say build back better. Now, in this context of COVID, we all say build back greener. No doubt about that at all. But this is where leadership comes into play. And you have to take certain calls. The global economy saw a downturn of nearly 6 to 7% last year, something that has never been seen before in recent times. You have little choice but to ramp up the global economy. So does India, which saw a nearly 10% fall in its GDP. Now, given these circumstances, yes, it's good, and we must try and see what best we can do in terms of building back sustainably, building back greener. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about it. But leaders also have the responsibility of, let me say, urgent action. And sometimes a lot of that has to be done in the way you are doing it, because you've had such a catastrophic fall that you really need to provide support and succor to your people. But let me leave one other thought with you. While adaptation, mitigation, each of these things have their technical aspects. I'm a bit of an old-fashioned person who believes that finally it is development which is the cause and really the bedrock of resilience and indeed adaptation. Countries which are rich would be able to undertake much more adaptation. Their resilience levels are far more. So those who are poor, they are vulnerable. They remain at the bottom end of things. So in that sense, when you look at it, development and growth per se are perhaps the bedrocks of your abilities to be able to manage change, adapt to change. Of course, if you can bring about the growth through greening, and I think countries like India are doing a lot on that. Let me just take a minute of your time and draw your attention to the kind of actions that India is taking. The renewable efforts on India's part, 450 gigawatts by 2030. No other country in the world is taking such a big bet on renewable. Electrifying the Indian railways. These are some of the big things, and we are taking them at the same time while we are faced with the greatest of vulnerabilities. Look at what floods have done in India, cyclones that we've had, and tackling each and every one of these things. So renewables, building resilience, each and every one of them is important. And I think we are striking a particularly good balance.
Right. Those are absolutely valid points. Suruchi ma'am, invariably we return to our conversations return to the point where we talk about the manner in which climate action is also affected by the manner in which rich developing countries, poorer countries make our international order. The responsibility that must be shared by the developed countries, the carbon space that must be distributed in an equitable way. So the lifestyle changes that we are talking about. Do you also see that developed countries must take a certain priority and urgency with which they address these needs, as they must in case of emissions?
Definitely. It's been a long-standing debate actually in developed countries in terms of talking about their lifestyles, their consumptive lifestyles, and which is not comparable to anywhere with the developing world. For example, the US 17 times more consumptive easily compared to India. So if we start looking at the statistics and comparing, world data in terms of looking at how countries have been consuming and the lifestyles being led within those countries, there's a big comparison, a stark comparison that we can see between the developed and the developing world, and therefore this has been a long-standing agenda in terms of basically asking the developed world to reduce the ecological footprint and their carbon footprint, which may help address the issues we are talking about in terms of mitigating climate change. And therefore, the reason why the burden was put heavily on the developed countries initially, and with the objective to see them contribute more in terms of the reductions initially, which was then to be followed by other countries, with developing countries joining in. But given the way the negotiations have gone over the years and the contributions that we see, basically a large amount of that space is already being utilized. If you look at the historical burden and the emissions that have been released into the atmosphere, largely from the developed countries, their consumptive lifestyles, and therefore the issue of equity and justice and the space that the developing world needs to basically grow. So all of this connects very conveniently from one to the other, and while we do now emphasize on the fact of focusing on consumptive lifestyles and reductions in that and the footprints, simultaneously we're also looking in-house and seeing what we can do as a country, or for example, India, the areas where India can basically improve in terms of promoting sustainable lifestyles, and this is something that every country should be focusing on. But if you look at it from the carbon footprint point of view, definitely the burden is, it's much more burdened on the developed country side, and therefore the contributions, as we say, we do expect that they take a much larger role in terms of basically reducing and moving towards a net zero. And as you also see, India has been saying that we would first like to see what other countries put on the table, and then we basically go in net zero before India actually assesses for its own self when will it basically be able to follow the same path. So and there's nothing wrong in what India is saying actually, and it's basically based on a lot of data that goes behind it, and the historical burden and the burden sharing we talk about.
Professor Joshi, if you could give us some insights about the point that Suruchi ma'am just mentioned about Prime Minister talking about lifestyle changes across the world, but the changes that we have been able to brought about in our context in India, wherein we are through that demonstrating our commitment to climate action. If you could take us through some examples of which, I think there would be some in the agriculture field in particular, the manner in which we've brought that about. If you could just take us through the steps that India has already taken, which could be seen as an example for the world to notice.
Well, one of the things is, in the front of renewable energy, the kind of commitments which are over there. So now green hydrogen is being talked about in addition to solar and wind, photovoltaic, those kind of things. That is a excellent example, and with the 175 gigawatt achieved, that sets a very clear-cut, commitment which countries.
You're right, sir. In fact, farmers using solar power to run their water pumps is an excellent example of the manner in which lifestyle changes, I think, could be brought about.
Yes.
Please go on, sir. Yes.
Yeah, and then at the behest of this interventions or the investments which are there in renewable energy, so you have your transport sector, you have your agriculture sector, which is getting hugely benefited. Like the one example which you gave, instead of depending more on electricity or other alternate fossil fuels or other alternate sources of energy. So renewable energy is bringing a lot of benefit to the local communities, whether it is Himalayan mountains or the forest areas of central India. then there are many of the interventions which are taking place in the agriculture sector, the way, fertilizer or the drought resistant species which are coming up, and the way irrigation was being done. So the newer term of precision agriculture is coming into picture, wherein, the land could be mapped in the sub-inches level, and the nutrients requirement of soil could be estimated. So it is adding one way, the investment which was
drop irrigation, sir, I think in the same context,
and then certainly, yeah. And then there is insurance which is coming, which is addressing the issues of climate change induced disasters. So agriculture insurance has actually come in a very big way in the country. Right. So likewise, the forestry sector, if you look at, the kind of commitment which has come for 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent green cover has to be increased. So recently, government invested on Campa and rediverted the funds so that the urban green covers could be increased. There is a policy of Nagar 1, which is enhanced, and there are 200 cities which are earmarked for such kind of things. So what I see, country has bring in all the sectors some kind of very clear-cut changes, and these changes are actually showing some kind of better expectations as well as results, which are a wonderful example for the global, arena. And many of the world leaders, they are appreciating this, and that is probably the reason, whether it is US, whether it was Sweden or other countries, Poland, they are coming much forward and shaking hand with India to fight or to address the issues of climate change together. So these are some of the examples which I can cite.
Right. Ambassador Puri, the Prime Minister has time and again, not just at the present summit, spoken on the importance of disaster resilient infrastructure on international platforms. Now, for a layperson to understand, this year itself, there's no dearth of natural disasters that we've witnessed. We've seen unprecedented forest fires. We've seen climate rise and summers in Europe that the continent had never seen before. In our own subcontinent, the floods and other disasters have been more devastating than before. Is then this a good time for the world to take note and do more about this vision of a disaster resilient infrastructure? Because then everyone will have to pitch in. Prime Minister may have mentioned the vision, but every country will have to play a part in making that a reality.
Well, India has been in the lead on this.
Yes.
We have set up the coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure, and all the major countries in the world have either joined or are in the process of joining. So the world has recognized this. Of course, the CDRI goes beyond simply the climate ones.
Yes.
It includes earthquakes, for example,
yes,
which are not climate related. But climate related events and difficult events for the world to cope with are on the increase, whether it is those which have something to do with melts of snowfall, whether it's fires, whether it's ocean related events. Each of these we are seeing at an increase. So the impact of climate change, particularly on countries such as in South Asia, which are particularly vulnerable, but we've seen that all across. We've seen it in the United States, in the west coast of the United States. We've seen fires in Australia.
Absolutely.
We've seen these all across in every part of the world. And so the fact that the world must recognize that they need to build resilience is an integral part of adaptation. And infrastructure, which is, the backbone of your economies. So when you are building infrastructure, isn't it a good idea that you make the infrastructure, what should I say, disaster resilient? Why? Because you are putting in money that is expected to last you 40, 50 years. Please ensure that today, not only do you use the right technology, but you use technology which promotes sustainability, because this is going to be there for a long run. And it should hurt the environment. Rather, it should protect and nurture the environment, because that's in everybody's goal and everybody's good. And I therefore happy that once again, this is yet another element of adaptation which got highlighted. And let's hope that the world actually starts acting on this, not just domestically, but globally.
Right. And Suruchi ma'am, talking about disaster resilient infrastructure, do you again see over this theme as well, the world would be divided into developed, developing and poorer countries, the ways in which island nations we know are more vulnerable to natural disasters, and they've also sort of spoken about the urgency of acting not just in a better manner but also quickly. So do you see the needs and requirements of developing countries, poorer countries would be significantly different in this context of disaster resilient infrastructure?
So while the needs would be different, looking at it purely from a climate risk point of view, both the developed and the developing world would be affected.
But the vulnerability of it, there are fires in America. You
will find impacts, being observed even in the developed world of various kinds, whether we're talking about the Californian fires or the fires in Australia or the floods in Europe. And then, of course, we have examples back home in terms of floods and then cyclones hitting our coastal areas, etc. So world over, there are examples of various kinds. So both developed and developing countries, the world that would be affected. But in terms of the response mechanisms, the point that Ambassador Puri made earlier, there's a lot of a difference in terms of the response mechanisms that exist between the developed and the developing world, because they have the finances and the technologies and the wherewithal to be able to respond to some of these changes that we're talking about. But in case of the developing world, all these developed countries or the small island developing states, where they're going to be losing land actually when we're talking about coastal risks, ideally, they do not have the capacities to be able to respond effectively, and therefore they would need support in the form of technology, support in the form of finances, to be able to invest in certain areas, to be able to help respond to these changes that we're talking about. And therefore, that's where the difference comes from in terms of capabilities, capacities, institutions, infrastructure that we have in place to be able to help us respond to these changes that we're talking about. And in the case of the developing world, definitely there's a gap.
Right, and Professor Joshi, our viewers would be very interested in also knowing how is it in a real world taking shape when we talk about disaster resilient infrastructure. The conversation has been on, Prime Minister has been advocating about it, but in real terms, what changes, what real infrastructure, what real policies have taken shape, if you could take us through that in the recent years?
Well, there is one Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction 2030, which very categorically and clearly tells many of the measures which are there. In country, Prime Minister had announced 10-point agenda for disaster risk reduction. So that is basically to develop, disaster risk resilient infrastructure, whether it is housing, whether it is transport or other kind of sectors, forest, agriculture and all. I have slightly different take when it comes to the global disasters. We had the examples from Australia bushfire, which was in a sense unmanageable, and similar kind of things when there was flooding in Germany, and also heat waves in Canada and Sweden, European countries. So we got to understand that though these countries appear to be somewhat disaster resilient or prepared to address these disasters, but they couldn't do. So that is, when it is actually, when it is coming to disasters, so entire globe is somewhere helpless. So therein, having disaster risk resilient infrastructure is needed at par. Though it is very true that, most of the developing countries, island nations, they have relatively higher degree of vulnerability. But when it comes to disasters, many a times even the developed world was not able to give the carry out appropriate mitigation measures over there. So in that sense, if you look, so globally we need to relook into the infrastructure development which is taking place. We need to bring in resilient infrastructure for compulsorily into all development activities. And that is certainly more needed in tropical world or developing countries, but it is equally needed in the developed countries as well. So though they appears to be financially well and technically well, but still when it comes to knock from the disaster at times, and they were not able to actually match the word which many a times we expect from the developed countries.
Right. Ambassador Puri, the manners in which India has been working towards becoming a part of the solution as far as climate crisis is concerned, what example that sort of stands out is the International Solar Alliance. I mean, given the manner in which India has played a leadership role and brought countries together for the common resource that we all share. And in this edition of COP26, there are expectations that I think it will be taken a step forward, a global grid. The plan for it will take shape. How do you see that as really a game changer for the manner in which transition to cleaner sources of energy, not just for one nation, for India, but the world, could happen at a more efficient manner?
You know, renewable energy and rather harnessing the sun's energy directly is something which technologically was feasible for a long time.
Yes.
But no one really took the concrete steps to make it possible. And particularly, let me say this, particularly in the developing world, including in India, where the general feeling was that it's difficult to do, it's very limited in its abilities, and more than anything else, it's unreliable because what will you do at night time, and its costs are high. So somebody had to, as they say, bell the cat. And it was India which said, look, we are a country in the sunbelt. This is something which God, nature has given us. And so is most of the developing world. But we can't just sit back and say it's a difficult task, technologically possible, but it can't. Let us do what we can and let us set up institutions which are not just national, but which are international. And look at some of the results. It's not for nothing that we are saying that we will do 450 gigawatts by 2030. It is because what have we seen? That today in India, during the daylight hours, production of electric power through the solar route is the cheapest form of producing electricity.
Right.
Now, in India, we are noticing it. Do you think the rest of the world is not noticing? What are they seeing? They are seeing that if you can do it, it's a technology which stands proven and established. We will also do it. And through the Solar Alliance, which today has 90 plus countries which are its members and is now open to any country in the world, we are growing. It is becoming a tool for, furthering, let me say, global good. And at the same time, it is bringing to the world the fact that it was India which took the lead, Indian innovation, Indian efforts, and of course, there is global good to it. So I think this is something very important, and I'm glad that we took this decision in 2015 during the Paris COP, and I believe tomorrow we might launch, along with the UK Prime Minister, this one sun, one globe and one grid. That's a real good idea, because you must make this particular direct solar resource one which the world adopts as its own and, develops a kind of stakeholding in it.
Right. And Professor Joshi, I think that also is a critical point about, one, having a vision, two, really turning that vision into action as far as climate change initiatives are concerned. Your thoughts, sir, on International Solar Alliance? India has made an ambitious target that Ambassador Puri just spoke about, 50 gigawatts by the end of the decade. Solar energy, we know, has also become cheaper and more affordable. Rupees 2 per unit is quite incredible an achievement, I think, for the developing countries. How do you see this march forward in sort of strengthening renewable energy infrastructure in the country? It is already one of the world's largest installed capacity.
See, to best of my understanding, there are two challenges with renewable energy. One is cost, and another is, the place where it is generated. At times it is not used there, but it is required somewhere else. So technically, there are innovations, there are changes, R&D, wherein cost is coming as low as possible. Like say in green hydrogen, it has been said to be as 111, in 1 year, $1 kind of cost will be coming. The another challenge was to transport it, to store it and put it somewhere, to put it to the place where it is needed. So, when you talk about ISA and specifically this one grid, one planet, one sun, so that is something which is enabling that, it is enabling that the renewable energy is going beyond the transboundary limits. Those kind of exchanges are there. So it means the countries like India, which because of its geographical location, which is favorable, which is having a favorable sunlight, is able to do it, but it should be, or it will be able to provide to the other countries as well. So such kind of interventions were very much needed, and through ISA, country has shown the required leadership which was there. And similar things are coming in the technology end also, wherein there are commitments, there are announcements at the behest of Reliance and other giant bodies which are talking about that they will be bringing the cost to equivalent to $1 for green hydrogen, for example.
Professor Joshi, it's interesting. I mean, do you think then that the intervention, participation of the private sector could in fact be a very important point of change in the manner in which collectively action is taken against climate crisis?
Well, definitely, there are many of the things which do need, a timely research and development. And therein, these private sectors, they are much more efficient and much more effective when it comes to bringing something onto the platform. So we have seen in many of the sectors in the country and globally, like, space technology is one, wherein private players have come globally, and in India also there are wonderful examples which are coming up. So I personally see there is whole range of sectors where there's private entities, they can come forward and they can bring the desired impact which was long awaited for many of the resources.
Right. In fact, I'm told that we're expecting Prime Minister's intervention at COP26 meet anytime now, and we'll go across live the moment Prime Minister is there to make India's perspective clear to the world. Suruchi ma'am, talking about energy and its relationship with climate change, with initiatives like International Solar Alliance, with commitment to renewable energy sources, how has it transformed India's energy basket in the recent times, and how do you see it in the years ahead? We know, let the truth be told, our electricity, most of it still comes from coal-fired power plants, but that is also the challenge that developing countries are facing while they transition to cleaner sources. But as we speak, in the recent years, how have you mapped the transition that India has recorded in the energy basket, in the manner it uses clean or otherwise energy?
And as Ambassador said, that we have a very big target that we put forth for in our NDCs in terms of meeting our goals with regard to renewables. In terms of the energy basket, I think the objective, so we are in the transition phase, the objective would be to see how the share of renewables and clean energy slowly keeps increasing over time. Of course, the targets that we set for ourselves is something we would have to basically review at the national.
Minister of India.
Ma'am, I'll just hold you for a moment. We're getting live inputs. Prime Minister.
Your Excellency, you have the floor.
फ्रेंड्स, आज मैं आपके बीच उस भूमि का प्रतिनिधित्व कर रहा हूं जिस भूमि ने हजारों वर्ष पहले ये मंत्र दिया था, समगच्छध्वं समद्वत्वं संभो मानसी जानता। आज 21वीं सदी में ये मंत्र और ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण हो गया है, प्रासंगिक हो गया है। समगच्छध्वं यानी सभी साथ मिलकर चले, संबद्धम यानी सभी मिलजुल कर आपस में संवाद करें, और सम्मो मनानस्य जानता यानी सभी के मन भी आपस में मिले रहें। फ्रेंड्स, जब मैं पहली बार क्लाइमेट समिट में पेरिस आया था, तब मेरा यह इरादा नहीं था कि दुनिया में हो रहे अनेक वायदों में एक वायदा अपना भी जोड़ दूं। मैं पूरी मानवता के लिए एक चिंता के साथ आया था। मैं उस संस्कृति के प्रतिनिधि के रूप में आया था जिसने सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः अर्थात सभी सुखी रहे का संदेश दिया है। और इसलिए मेरे लिए पेरिस में हुआ आयोजन एक समिट नहीं, सेंटिमेंट था, एक कमिटमेंट था। और भारत वो वायदे विश्व से नहीं कर रहा था, बल्कि वो वायदे 125 करोड़ भारतवासी अपने आप से कर रहे थे। और मुझे खुशी है कि भारत जैसा विकासशील देश जो करोड़ों लोगों को गरीबी से बाहर निकालने में जुटा है, जो करोड़ों लोगों की ईज ऑफ लिविंग पर रात दिन काम कर रहा है, आज विश्व की आबादी का 17% होने के बावजूद जिसकी एमिशंस में रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी सिर्फ 5% रही है, उस भारत ने अपना कर्तव्य पूरा करके दिखाने में कोई कसर बाकी नहीं छोड़ी है। आज पूरा विश्व मानता है कि भारत एकमात्र बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था है जिसने पेरिस कमिटमेंट पर लेटर एंड स्पिरिट में डिलीवर किया है। हम संकल्पबद्ध होकर हर संभव एफर्ट्स कर रहे हैं, परिश्रम कर रहे हैं और परिणाम लाकर दिखा रहे हैं। फ्रेंड्स, आज जब मैं आपके बीच आया हूं तो भारत के ट्रैक रिकॉर्ड को भी लेकर के आया। मेरी बातें सिर्फ शब्द नहीं हैं, ये भावी पीढ़ी के उज्जवल भविष्य का जयघोष है। आज भारत इंस्टॉल्ड रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी में विश्व में चौथे नंबर पर है। बीते 7 वर्षों में भारत की नॉन फोसिल फ्यूल एनर्जी में 25% से ज्यादा की वृद्धि हुई है और अब ये हमारे एनर्जी मिक्स का 40% पहुंच गया है। फ्रेंड्स, विश्व की पूरी आबादी से भी अधिक यात्री भारतीय रेल से हर वर्ष यात्रा करते हैं। इस विशाल रेलवे सिस्टम ने अपने आप को 2030 तक नेट जीरो बनाने का लक्ष्य रखा है। अकेली इस पहल से सालाना 60 मिलियन टन एमिशन की कमी होगी। इसी प्रकार हमारे विशाल एलईडी बल्ब अभियान से सालाना 40 मिलियन टन एमिशन कम हो रहा है। आज भारत दृढ़ इच्छा शक्ति के साथ ऐसे कई सारे इनिशिएटिव्स पर तेजी से काम कर रहा है। इसके साथ ही भारत ने अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर दुनिया का सहयोग करने के लिए इंस्टीट्यूशनल सॉल्यूशन भी दिए हैं। सोलर पावर में एक क्रांतिकारी कदम के रूप में हमने इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस की पहल की। क्लाइमेट एडप्शन के लिए हमने कोलिशन फॉर डिजास्टर रेजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का निर्माण किया है। ये करोड़ों जिंदगियों को बचाने के लिए एक संवेदनशील और महत्वपूर्ण पहल है। फ्रेंड्स, मैं एक और महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर आप सभी का ध्यान केंद्रित करना चाहता हूं। आज विश्व मान रहा है कि क्लाइमेट चेंज में लाइफस्टाइल की एक बहुत बड़ी भूमिका है। मैं आज आपके सामने एक वन वर्ड मूवमेंट का प्रस्ताव रखता हूं। वन वर्ड एक शब्द क्लाइमेट के संदर्भ में वन वर्ल्ड एक विश्व का मूल आधार बन सकता है, अधिष्ठान बन सकता है। ये एक शब्द है लाइफ, LIFE, यानी लाइफ स्टाइल फॉर एनवायरमेंट। आज जरूरत है कि हम सभी लोग एक साथ आकर कलेक्टिव पार्टिसिपेशन के साथ लाइफ स्टाइल फॉर एनवायरमेंट यानी लाइफ को एक अभियान की तरह आगे बढ़ाएं। ये एनवायरमेंटल कॉन्शियस लाइफ स्टाइल का एक मास मूवमेंट बन सकता है आज आवश्यकता है माइंडलेस और डिस्ट्रक्टिव कंजम्पशन के बजाय माइंडफुल और डेलिबरेट यूटिलाइजेशन की। ये मूवमेंट एक साथ मिलकर ऐसे लक्ष्य तय कर सकता है जो डाइवर्स एरिया जैसे फिशिंग, एग्रीकल्चर, वेलनेस, डाइटरी चॉइसेस, हाउसिंग, पैकेजिंग, हॉस्पिटैलिटी, टूरिज्म, क्लोथिंग, फैशन, वाटर मैनेजमेंट और एनर्जी जैसे अनेक सेक्टर्स में एक क्रांतिकारी बदलाव ला सकता है। ये ऐसे विषय हैं जहां हम में से प्रत्येक को हर रोज कॉन्शियस चॉइस करनी होगी। पूरी दुनिया में करोड़ों अरबों लोगों के हर रोज की ये चॉइसेस क्लाइमेट चेंज के खिलाफ लड़ाई को हर दिन बिलियन स्टेप्स आगे ले जाएगी। और मैं इस आर्थिक आधार पर, वैज्ञानिक आधार पर, बीती शताब्दी के अनुभवों के आधार पर हर कसौटी पर खरा उतरने का मूवमेंट मानता हूं। स्व से समष्टि का यही रास्ता है, अहम से वयम के कल्याण का यही रास्ता है। फ्रेंड्स, क्लाइमेट चेंज पर इस वैश्विक मंथन के बीच मैं भारत की ओर से इस चुनौती से निपटने के लिए 5 अमृत तत्व रखना चाहता हूं, पंचामृत की सौगात देना चाहता हूं। पहला, भारत 2030 तक अपनी नॉन फोसिल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी को 500 गीगावाट तक पहुंचाएगा। दूसरा, भारत 2030 तक अपनी 50% एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट्स रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी से पूरी करेगा। तीसरा, भारत अब से लेकर 2030 तक के कुल प्रोजेक्टेड कार्बन एमिशन में 1 बिलियन टन की कमी करेगा। चौथा, 2030 तक भारत अपनी अर्थव्यवस्था की कार्बन इंटेंसिटी को 45% से भी कम करेगा। और पांचवा, वर्ष 2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा। ये पंचामृत क्लाइमेट एक्शन में भारत का एक अभूतपूर्व योगदान होंगे। फ्रेंड्स, ये सच्चाई हम सभी जानते हैं कि क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस को लेकर आज तक किए गए वायदे खोखले ही साबित हुए हैं। जब हम सभी क्लाइमेट एक्शन पर अपने एम्बिशन बढ़ा रहे हैं, तब क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस पर विश्व के एम्बिशन वही नहीं रह सकते जो पेरिस एग्रीमेंट के समय थे। आज जब भारत ने एक नए कमिटमेंट और एक नई ऊर्जा के साथ आगे बढ़ने का संकल्प लिया है, तो ऐसे समय में क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस और लो कॉस्ट क्लाइमेट टेक्नोलॉजीज का ट्रांसफर और महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है। भारत की अपेक्षा है कि विकसित देश जल्द से जल्द $1 ट्रिलियन का क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस उपलब्ध कराएं। आज आवश्यकता है कि जैसे हम क्लाइमेट मिटिगेशन में हुई प्रगति को ट्रैक करते हैं, वैसे ही हम क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस को भी ट्रैक करें। उचित न्याय तो यह होगा कि जो देश क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस पर किए अपने वादों पर खरे नहीं उतरे, उन पर दबाव बढ़े। फ्रेंड्स, आज भारत क्लाइमेट के विषय पर बहुत ही साहस और बड़ी महत्वाकांक्षा के साथ आगे बढ़ रहा है। भारत अन्य सभी विकासशील देशों की पीड़ा भी समझता है, उन्हें साझा करता है और उनकी अपेक्षाओं की अभिव्यक्ति भी निरंतर करता रहेगा। कई विकासशील देशों के लिए क्लाइमेट चेंज उनके अस्तित्व पर मंडरा रहा है, एक बड़ा संकट है। हमें दुनिया को बचाने के लिए आज बड़े कदम उठाने ही होंगे। यही समय की मांग है और यही इस फोरम की प्रासंगिकता भी सिद्ध करेगा। मुझे विश्वास है कि ग्लासगो में लिए गए निर्णय हमारी भावी पीढ़ियों का भविष्य बचाएंगे और सुरक्षित और समृद्ध जीवन का उपहार देंगे। अध्यक्ष जी, मैंने समय अधिक लिया, आपसे मैं क्षमा चाहता हूं, लेकिन विकासशील देशों की आवाज उठाना ये मैं अपना कर्तव्य मानता हूं, इसलिए मैंने उस पर भी बल दिया है। मैं फिर एक बार आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूं।
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my
And those updates coming in live from Glasgow, United Kingdom. Prime Minister Narendra Modi making a powerful intervention in the moment when he spoke about from the perspective of developing countries. Several big points that Prime Minister mentioned and he highlighted. Most important among them, by 2070, Prime Minister has committed by India will achieve the net zero emission. That is, in fact, the focus of a lot of conversations. But he also made the point very clear about the responsibility of the developed country. And speaking in a very clear tone from the perspective of developing countries, he said that developed countries have to be made accountable for the promises of climate finance that has not really taken shape so far, that have been hollow so far. Low cost technology transfer has to happen and the countries have to be accountable for it. He spoke about the manner in which the funding must also be increased. In fact, let me quickly go across to Ambassador Puri, who continues to be with us. Sir, I think in a very, it's a short but a powerful intervention where he really called spade a spade, and the kind of accountability that he demanded from the developed countries on climate financing, I think that really stood out.
Shubhendu, I think the Honorable Prime Minister certainly made a very, very strong and impassioned speech, and something which is very strongly pushed the agenda of the developing countries. No doubt about that at all. I think the main point that he said was that India acts on its commitments. It just doesn't make the statements and then look here and there. This is something which was very strongly highlighted by him. And then what did he go on to say? He upped what we had promised in Paris and what we have since promised domestically significantly, taking our renewables goal up to 500 gigawatts. We had just been speaking about 450 gigawatts. This is not just adding 50 gigawatts. Just think about where we are today and the kind of ramp up that will be required in just 10 years' time. Similarly, he added the same things in terms of what we would do in every sector, including in terms of what we would do in terms of emissions by the coal sector, which is critical in India for electric power. And then he announced net zero by 2070. Look, the point that was made there was what the world is looking at, everybody become net zero by 2050. He made it very succinctly and strongly clear that, look, this is not a go at this particular point. But we are the country and the geography which is undertaking some of the most massive climate actions, including in mitigation, not just adaptation, which was talked about earlier. But we can't do anything about the fact that we have to also pursue our development agenda, but we will pursue a green development agenda. And look at the facts and figures which were highlighted, the 5 points. India as a point of action on climate change, that is what the Prime Minister underlined and set a timeline for the country. This is something which is particularly important and noteworthy, that the developed countries were asked to meet their commitments, walk the talk on their commitments, particularly on finance and technology. Certainly, very important. But, we haven't really seen them do it in the past. We hope that they will see the example that is being set by a country like India, which has some of the highest and most difficult development imperatives and development challenges to meet for its people. to provide a better quality of life for 17% of the globe.
Right. Suruchi ma'am, your thoughts, Prime Minister in his intervention clearly distinguishing between what it is to make a climate promise and what it is to really act on those promises. The points that he listed from the example of Indian Railways to LED bulbs, how significant do you think it was to make that point on this global platform where it is action which is missing from most of the interventions?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that he highlighted was the need for collective action on the issues looking at large developing countries like India in terms of responding to climate change and by way of reducing our share of fossil fuel contributions. Through his speech, he's already raised the bar for India in terms of India's contributions in its NDC. So by 2030, of course, earlier we were talking about 450 gigawatts, and now we already basically talked about 500 gigawatts in terms of contributions, raising the bar in terms of emissions intensity.
Right. Suruchi ma'am, also we were not getting your audio very clearly. We're just checking at our end if we can just fix that. Ambassador Puri, if I can come to you. Meanwhile, talking about transforming climate change initiatives into a mass movement was one of the highlights of what Prime Minister said. And really, I was thinking it also echoes with a lot of, youth activists, young people from across the world who've gathered and who've said that make it a priority. We have to act now. Let us come together and find solution. I think it does really echo with the sentiment of the young as well. How transformative do you think that vision, if translated into action, could be?
We mentioned that a few minutes back.
Yes.
Without the participation of people, and particularly young people, something which is like climate change, which affects every aspect of your life, it is not going to be possible. So it's not just a question of mainstreaming it. You have to actually internalize it. And I liked that aspect of calling it life, lifestyle changes for the environment. Internalize the fact that carbon has caused a certain degree of problem. It's made your life better. It's done many things. But now we have reached a point where the betterment which carbon brought in our lives has reached a point where we need to do something about it. And we need to work towards decarbonization, and we need to work about adaptation, since the carbon that we have used is resting in the atmosphere and its consequences are something that we have no choice. So I particularly like the idea of energizing people and people's participation. Without that, are you going to be able to change a transformative thing of this kind? Of course.
Right. Ambassador Puri, in fact, on that note, let's also once again listen in to Prime Minister's intervention that he made just a short while ago at COP26.
फ्रेंड्स, आज मैं आपके बीच उस भूमि का प्रतिनिधित्व कर रहा हूं जिस भूमि ने हजारों वर्ष पहले ये मंत्र दिया था, समगच्छध्वं समद्वत्वं संवो मानसी जानताम। आज 21वीं सदी में ये मंत्र और ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण हो गया है, प्रासंगिक हो गया है। समगच्छध्वं यानी सभी साथ मिलकर चले, संबद्धम यानी सभी मिलजुल कर आपस में संवाद करें, और सम्मो मनानस्य जानताम यानी सभी के मन भी आपस में मिले रहें। फ्रेंड्स, जब मैं पहली बार क्लाइमेट समिट में पेरिस आया था, तब मेरा यह इरादा नहीं था कि दुनिया में हो रहे अनेक वायदों में एक वायदा अपना भी जोड़ दूं। मैं पूरी मानवता के लिए एक चिंता के साथ आया था। मैं उस संस्कृति के प्रतिनिधि के रूप में आया था जिसने सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः अर्थात सभी सुखी रहे का संदेश दिया है, और इसलिए मेरे लिए पेरिस में हुआ आयोजन एक समिट नहीं, सेंटिमेंट था, एक कमिटमेंट था। और भारत वो वायदे विश्व से नहीं कर रहा था, बल्कि वो वायदे 125 करोड़ भारतवासी अपने आप से कर रहे थे। और मुझे खुशी है कि भारत जैसा विकासशील देश जो करोड़ों लोगों को गरीबी से बाहर निकालने में जुटा है, जो करोड़ों लोगों की ईज ऑफ लिविंग पर रात दिन काम कर रहा है, आज विश्व की आबादी का 17% होने के बावजूद जिसकी एमिशंस में रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी सिर्फ 5% रही है, उस भारत ने अपना कर्तव्य पूरा करके दिखाने में कोई कसर बाकी नहीं छोड़ी है। आज पूरा विश्व मानता है कि भारत एकमात्र बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था है जिसने पेरिस कमिटमेंट पर लेटर एंड स्पिरिट में डिलीवर किया है। हम संकल्पबद्ध होकर हर संभव एफर्ट्स कर रहे हैं, परिश्रम कर रहे हैं और परिणाम लाकर दिखा रहे हैं। फ्रेंड्स, आज जब मैं आपके बीच आया हूं तो भारत के ट्रैक रिकॉर्ड को भी लेकर के आया हूं। मेरी बातें सिर्फ शब्द नहीं हैं, ये भावी पीढ़ी के उज्जवल भविष्य का जयघोष है। आज भारत इंस्टॉल्ड रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी में विश्व में चौथे नंबर पर है। बीते 7 वर्षों में भारत की नॉन फोसिल फ्यूल एनर्जी में 25% से ज्यादा की वृद्धि हुई है और अब ये हमारे एनर्जी मिक्स का 40% पहुंच गया है। फ्रेंड्स, विश्व की पूरी आबादी से भी अधिक यात्री भारतीय रेल से हर वर्ष यात्रा करते हैं। इस विशाल रेलवे सिस्टम ने अपने आप को 2030 तक नेट जीरो बनाने का लक्ष्य रखा है। अकेली इस पहल से सालाना 60 मिलियन टन एमिशन की कमी होगी। इसी प्रकार हमारे विशाल एलईडी बल्ब अभियान से सालाना 40 मिलियन टन एमिशन कम हो रहा है। आज भारत दृढ़ इच्छा शक्ति के साथ ऐसे कई सारे इनिशिएटिव्स पर तेजी से काम कर रहा है। इसके साथ ही भारत ने अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर दुनिया का सहयोग करने के लिए इंस्टीट्यूशनल सॉल्यूशन भी दिए हैं। सोलर पावर में एक क्रांतिकारी कदम के रूप में हमने इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस की पहल की। क्लाइमेट एडप्शन के लिए हमने कोलिशन फॉर डिजास्टर रेजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का निर्माण किया है। ये करोड़ों जिंदगियों को बचाने के लिए एक संवेदनशील और महत्वपूर्ण पहल है। फ्रेंड्स, मैं एक और महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर आप सभी का ध्यान केंद्रित करना चाहता हूं। आज विश्व मान रहा है कि क्लाइमेट चेंज में लाइफस्टाइल की एक बहुत बड़ी भूमिका है। मैं आज आपके सामने एक वन वर्ड मूवमेंट का प्रस्ताव रखता हूं। वन वर्ड एक शब्द क्लाइमेट के संदर्भ में वन वर्ल्ड एक विश्व का मूल आधार बन सकता है, अधिष्ठान बन सकता है। ये एक शब्द है लाइफ, LIFE, यानी लाइफ स्टाइल फॉर एनवायरमेंट। आज जरूरत है कि हम सभी लोग एक साथ आकर कलेक्टिव पार्टिसिपेशन के साथ लाइफ स्टाइल फॉर एनवायरमेंट यानी लाइफ को एक अभियान की तरह आगे बढ़ाएं। ये एनवायरमेंटल कॉन्शियस लाइफस्टाइल का एक मास मूवमेंट बन सकता है। आज आवश्यकता है माइंडलेस और डिस्ट्रक्टिव कंजम्पशन के बजाय माइंडफुल और डेलिबरेट यूटिलाइजेशन की। ये मूवमेंट एक साथ मिलकर ऐसे लक्ष्य तय कर सकता है जो डाइवर्स एरिया जैसे फिशिंग, एग्रीकल्चर, वेलनेस, डाइटरी चॉइसेस, हाउसिंग, पैकेजिंग, हॉस्पिटैलिटी, टूरिज्म, क्लोथिंग, फैशन, वाटर मैनेजमेंट और एनर्जी जैसे अनेक सेक्टर्स में एक क्रांतिकारी बदलाव ला सकता है। ये ऐसे विषय हैं जहां हम में से प्रत्येक को हर रोज कॉन्शियस चॉइस करनी होगी। पूरी दुनिया में करोड़ों अरबों लोगों के हर रोज की ये चॉइसेस क्लाइमेट चेंज के खिलाफ लड़ाई को हर दिन बिलियन स्टेप्स आगे ले जाएगी। और मैं इस आर्थिक आधार पर, वैज्ञानिक आधार पर, बीती शताब्दी के अनुभवों के आधार पर हर कसौटी पर खरा उतरने का मूवमेंट मानता हूं। स्व से समष्टि का यही रास्ता है, अहम से वयम के कल्याण का यही रास्ता है। फ्रेंड्स, क्लाइमेट चेंज पर इस वैश्विक मंथन के बीच मैं भारत की ओर से इस चुनौती से निपटने के लिए 5 अमृत तत्व रखना चाहता हूं, पंचामृत की सौगात देना चाहता हूं। पहला, भारत 2030 तक अपनी नॉन फोसिल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी को 500 गीगावाट तक पहुंचाएगा। दूसरा, भारत 2030 तक अपनी 50% एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट्स रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी से पूरी करेगा। तीसरा, भारत अब से लेकर 2030 तक के कुल प्रोजेक्टेड कार्बन एमिशन में 1 बिलियन टन की कमी करेगा। चौथा, 2030 तक भारत अपनी अर्थव्यवस्था की कार्बन इंटेंसिटी को 45% से भी कम करेगा। और पांचवा, वर्ष 2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा। ये पंचामृत क्लाइमेट एक्शन में भारत का एक अभूतपूर्व योगदान होंगे। फ्रेंड्स, ये सच्चाई हम सभी जानते हैं कि क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस को लेकर आज तक किए गए वायदे खोखले ही साबित हुए हैं। जब हम सभी क्लाइमेट एक्शन पर अपने एम्बिशन बढ़ा रहे हैं, तब क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस पर विश्व के एम्बिशन वही नहीं रह सकते जो पेरिस एग्रीमेंट के समय थे। आज जब भारत ने एक नए कमिटमेंट और एक नई ऊर्जा के साथ आगे बढ़ने का संकल्प लिया है, तो ऐसे समय में क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस और लो कॉस्ट क्लाइमेट टेक्नोलॉजीज का ट्रांसफर और महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है। भारत की अपेक्षा है कि विकसित देश जल्द से जल्द $1 ट्रिलियन का क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस उपलब्ध कराएं। आज आवश्यकता है कि जैसे हम क्लाइमेट मिटिगेशन में हुई प्रगति को ट्रैक करते हैं, वैसे ही हम क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस को भी ट्रैक करें। उचित न्याय तो यह होगा कि जो देश क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस पर किए अपने वादों पर खरे नहीं उतरे, उन पर दबाव बढ़े। फ्रेंड्स, आज भारत क्लाइमेट के विषय पर बहुत ही साहस और बड़ी महत्वाकांक्षा के साथ आगे बढ़ रहा है। भारत अन्य सभी विकासशील देशों की पीड़ा भी समझता है, उन्हें साझा करता है और उनकी अपेक्षाओं की अभिव्यक्ति भी निरंतर करता रहेगा। कई विकासशील देशों के लिए क्लाइमेट चेंज उनके अस्तित्व पर मंडरा रहा है, एक बड़ा संकट है। हमें दुनिया को बचाने के लिए आज बड़े कदम उठाने ही होंगे। यही समय की मांग है और यही इस फोरम की प्रासंगिकता भी सिद्ध करेगा। मुझे विश्वास है कि ग्लासगो में लिए गए निर्णय हमारी भावी पीढ़ियों का भविष्य बचाएंगे और सुरक्षित और समृद्ध जीवन का उपहार देंगे। अध्यक्ष जी, मैंने समय अधिक लिया, आपसे मैं क्षमा चाहता हूं, लेकिन विकासशील देशों की आवाज उठाना ये मैं अपना कर्तव्य मानता हूं, इसलिए मैंने उस पर भी बल दिया है। मैं फिर एक बार आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूं।
So we just heard again Prime Minister's impassioned intervention at the Climate Summit Glasgow COP26. Several key takeaways that we have been talking about, and our guests Ambassador Manjeev Puri, Professor P.K. Joshi, Suruchi Bhadwal, Director Earth Sciences, Terry continue to be with us. Ambassador Puri, coming to the point that I really think made a lot of difference was the manner in which Prime Minister established how climate finance and tech transfer has to be an imperative. It can't be an option. When a country like India can make ambitious statements about what it can achieve, and it has extended that sort of ambition, then the responsibility of the developed countries must also be fulfilled, and there has to be accountability. How do you see that very significant intervention?
Shubhendu, you know, this is the podium from where leaders make statements, i.e. set out not just broad policy but specifics, as Prime Minister did here. But you know what will happen now is that much of these things get translated into negotiations and negotiated documents. And in a sense, a kind of soft law gets developed. And one of the things that we must remember that will happen is that issues of review, and then of, you know, peer reviews and people checking on where you have reached. You made a commitment that by 2030 you will do this.
Right.
Well, after 2 years there should be a review, after 3 years another review, and people will want to know at different stages, are you on the trajectory? Therefore, remember, these are very serious commitments. And the Prime Minister highlighted something very important, that when India has taken commitments, it has worked hard to meet the commitment. It is the only major G20 country on line to meet its Paris commitments. We have now upped our commitments, and we will therefore continue in the same way making those efforts. He then obliquely and very nicely pointed out that on the other hand, those with the abilities to be able to do things, and let me point out, not just with a historic responsibility to discharge their obligation, but those who have the abilities to do it, i.e. the developed world, has made commitments, and what is the result? They need to also be held accountability.
Right.
That's important. How much will happen? Let us understand. These are global power plays, and the world will move on in various ways. But we have demonstrated that we as a country remain committed to humankind's good, the planet's good, and we will do, indeed, I must say, we are doing much more than our fair share. We are working. We will make every effort also to hold others accountable. That's a difficult
And there was a moment of
but
turning
on
the
our part,
tables.
we will do everything.
Right. There was a moment in which there was a sort of turning of the tables, you know. He exceeded his time though, and he said it clearly that, look, I'm speaking from the perspective of developing countries, so it will take time. But he also says and talks about exerting pressure on developed countries who default on their promise of climate finance. I think so far our conversations were centering around the pressure that developing countries experience in a global summit like this. And here, categorically, Prime Minister talks about that this pressure must be directed to those who are faltering on their promises at the first place.
You know, Shubhendu, there's no doubt about that at all. But, you know, we have
How
to
do you
also
say it,
make
to
these
say it so
count.
clearly on an international platform?
Absolutely. No, you know, but these demands have been made many times, and they have been part of the demand. The
Right.
100 billion did not come out of nothing. It was made as a result of demands by countries like India.
Right.
The Prime Minister had to make it, and he made it. And he made it forcefully at a major place where, let me make this point, where he made major commitments on behalf of India,
Yeah.
commitments which are truly onerous. And then when he makes the demand or even reiterates the demand on the developed world, it carries a different kind of weight attached to it. That look, it's not just that you are making demands on me, you are delivering, you are acting on your demands, and now you are saying, what about you? What about what you had promised? What you promised yourself, please deliver. And then making the other point, that this is something which is an imperative for your good as well as the good of the world, and of course, the need of the developing world. And India, as the in a sense, the spokesperson for the developing world, has not just the right, the obligation to say so. And
Yes.
we did so.
Yes, and Suruchi ma'am, that important intervention about India taking a bold step of a net zero commitment by the year 2070. For those of us who do not understand the nitty-gritties of climate commitments, help us understand what weight this statement carries and what does it imply for India and the world?
So it means a lot for India making that statement actually, and we were just thinking that India would still take some time in terms of fixating a year to talk about net zero. But it's good that we gave our commitment, and we can see that the Prime Minister has already raised the bar for India with regard to its 2030 commitments, and also for the net zero commitment that we've made for 2070s now. It shows the commitment, the will that India has in terms of dealing with the issue of climate change. He also mentioned the point that India's formulated two global alliances, the CDRI and the ISA. If you were to look at it in a different manner, India is the only country which has provided an alternative platform for discussions for implementation of action on climate change, both with regard to mitigation and adaptation. Looking at these two global alliances, the CDRI and ISA, the only other platform is the negotiating platform that you have, which is the COP, which is happening right now. So if you were to move away from the negotiating platform and see how you can deliver, the two platforms that have been formulated in the world are given by India to the world. So it's the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition of Disaster Risk Resilient Infrastructure. So ideally, it shows the level of commitment that India holds in terms of contributing from its end to addressing the issue of climate change. India has also talked about collective leadership and collective action climate, and also the issue of transparency and accountability with regard to climate finance, the point by him. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Absolutely, ma'am. We could hear.
Sure. So basically the issue of transparency and accountability related to climate finance and the need for technology and finance to be able to assist in the overall processes. So I think very pertinent points made by the Prime Minister out there, and we do hope that the negotiations basically take many of these points forward over the next few days, and we see some strong agendas basically firming up based on the points that have been highlighted.
Right, and as we move towards conclusion, Ambassador Puri, your final thoughts. India has made its point very clear from the perspective of other developing countries as well. What can we now expect? You did mention that a lot of deliberations now is something that the summit goes into, but in tangible terms, what could we expect from COP26 Glasgow?
Shubhendu, now negotiations will begin. The developed world is not going to give up on this global net zero, not 2050, but finding some kind of language which tries to peg you to that. And we are not talking about a global net zero to follow the principles, but every country taking it. So it is going to be a tough one. We've made the point clear that our development imperative demand, we need a little bit more time, but we have set a timeline which is really fantastic because we are representing 17% of humankind. Secondly, we've taken on onerous commitments to do the right thing in terms of mitigation. And we have also asked the world to be supportive on technology, finance, and indeed on adaptation. Much is going to depend on how these negotiations now work out. My own sense is that the negotiations will now also be providing a certain degree of space for the developing world, etc. But I think we need to also ensure that we keep the pressure on the developed world that what they are demanding of the others, not just in terms of their commitments for finance and technology, but in terms of their emissions, not only that they make them zero by 2050, but before 2050, so that the rest of the world can try and achieve what the Prime Minister has offered in terms of India, trying to get towards net zero by 2070 for a country like India with our huge development imperative. Those who don't have these imperatives, do it now, start working on that now.
Right. On that note, Ambassador Puri, Suruchi ma'am, Professor Joshi, thank you very much for joining us in this special program and sharing your perspective. Thanks very much for your time as well. And our special coverage on India at COP26 will continue. For now, we conclude this presentation. We'll be back in a short while. Namaskar.